All right, so some background on Title IX. Like I said, it is kind of mandated by the Office of Civil Rights, or OCR, which is part of the Department of Education and part of the federal government. Sometimes the Department of Justice is also involved in that. It just depends on where the violation goes from there if it's investigated federally. Title IX is an amendment from 1972 to the 1965 Higher Education Act. So this was a President Nixon law. And what that said is it prohibits sexual discrimination in any aspect of K through 12 and post-secondary education. So up until then, Title IX had always been viewed historically as strictly athletics, so that girls had the same athletic opportunities as boys. However, in 2011, OCR determined that sexual harassment is a form of sexual discrimination, and that is also a violation of Title IX. So since then, we have taken a much deeper look into sex discrimination within schools and on college campuses. And so there's been a heavier push to make sure that we are not discriminating, that we're addressing any concerns, and that we're keeping that out of our schools. So OCR is, like I said, the office that issues the guidance that we try to follow. Go ahead. So we have three main student policies that address this with our student code of conduct. Those are 3280, 3285, and 3290. So we use the term sexual misconduct because it's a broad term that can incorporate anything from a sexist joke all the way up to sexual assault or rape. It's the most common term we use until the actual offense is determined, and it also helps us incorporate a lot of different acts that may not have official labels to that. Go ahead. So Clark County has jurisdiction on our students. Our student policies can be applied off campus when the student, for student behavior, even if when the behavior is deemed to negatively affect our school environment. So anything that happens on school obviously is something that we address. Anything that happens off campus but is affiliated, like a field trip or an overnight trip, state, something like that, that's all included. However, if something happens off school property at a private residence, but it negatively affects our school, so those behaviors come back and it creates a hostile environment or negative feelings of any kind, we want to address that, because even though it didn't happen on school property, it's still affecting our school and it's still affecting our students. So any action that could constitute a criminal offense is defined by federal or state law. This includes but is not limited to allegations of single or repeated violations of any local, state, or federal law in the municipality where the school is located. Essentially what that says is that if it's a criminal act but it's still negatively affecting our school, we still need to address it. Any situation where it appears that the student may present a danger or threat to the health or safety of him or herself or others, or any situation that significantly disrupts the rights, properties, or achievements of self or others, or significantly breaches the peace and or causes social disorder within the school. So this is taken from ATICSA, which is a national organization that helps administrators of Title IX. So it's a little long-winded, but essentially it says we can apply our code off campus if it negatively affects on campus.
For example, last year's Facebook horrible comments that came back to wreak havoc here at school, which is why we did that, and then involved the okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so if it ends up having a negative impact on our students or our staff, even if it happened off campus, we want to address it, because it does affect the way our students learn, how they feel safe, and how they're able to access different opportunities they have here. So all of this comes down to consent, and consent is informed, freely given, and mutually understood. Consent requires an affirmative act or statement by each participant. This doesn't always have to be verbal, but it does have to be affirmative, and it has to be understood by each person. Consent to one form of sexual activity does not imply consent to another form of sexual activity, and that also means that just because they consented once does not mean that every time after that they have then consented to that same activity. If coercion, intimidation, threats, and or physical force are used, there is no consent. If a person is mentally or physically incapacitated or impaired so that the person cannot understand the fact, nature, or extent of the sexual situation, there is no consent. This includes drug and alcohol use while being asleep or unconscious. This also includes blackouts, which is different than a pass out. So they have consumed so much alcohol that they no longer remember anything, however, they still appear to be functioning normally. Pass out is when they are unconscious. And then just for your information, Idaho state law states that anyone under 18 cannot legally give consent. So even if it is consensual, they cannot legally give consent if they are a minor. Go ahead and skip that. We don't have time for that, although it is a cute video. Sorry. Sorry. So when it comes to consent and alcohol and drug use, if alcohol is involved, victims may not want to report because they're afraid of getting in trouble for their participation in underage drinking or using drugs or marijuana. Our best practices say that we need to avoid repercussions for that, for the victim. That continues to create a chilling effect and they don't want to report. However, when it comes to an assault, that is the big picture that we want to be addressing, and the underage drinking are small potatoes. And we want to make sure that they feel comfortable bringing forward those big issues so that we can address them. However, if the person who is accused of assault has been drinking, that underage drinking may be tacked onto their adjudication. But we want victims to know that they're not going to be.
They feel safe too.
Yeah, that they feel safe bringing that forward.
Be in trouble for their own poor choices.
Yes. So. Hillary's like ready to go. She's like, let's get this over with. Like we said before, if they're impaired, there's no consent. Go ahead. So notice of possible misconduct. So you as an employee of the school, you have this perception of authority. You're older than the students. They believe that if they come to you with a problem, you have the power to fix it. So you are a mandatory reporter. And so that means that if you have notice, if you have any sort of information of sexual misconduct involving people affiliated with the school, students or teachers, that you need to report that. For student-on-student issues, the teacher level is all that is required to have notice. And what you might notice if something happens is a change in behavior. You'll know your students well enough to see that now they're a lot more despondent. Maybe they're not coming to class as often. They're usually really perky and they haven't been happy in several days. There's a lot going on with teenagers, and so that it could be any number of things. But if you start to notice a pattern of behavior, you're kind of put on notice that something is happening, and you should be asking questions or asking for assistance in determining what's going on there. For student-teacher issues, hopefully we never have those, but the administrative level is what we need. So if teachers are aware of that, it needs to be reported to the administration level, and that is when we have notice of that. And what that means is that if the employee or the school has notice and we choose to do nothing about it, the school is now liable. We've allowed that to happen, and we're continuing to allow it to happen, and we're not doing anything to address it. When that happens, we're charged with something called deliberate indifference, which means that we didn't care. We knew about it, but we just didn't care. So the way that we fight deliberate indifference is we do an investigation. If we investigate and we find something, that we do what we can to stop that from happening, and that whatever we chose to do to stop that from happening, if it was effective. And that's how we try to manage our cases. So notice for you, it might look a little different, but if you witness sexual misconduct, you're required to report it. If you read about it, this could be in reflection papers, social media, graffiti. This can even be anything that's anonymous. So maybe you see something written on the bathroom wall. You don't know who wrote it, but you still need to report it, and we just document that. And whatever we can do to investigate, we do. If not, it's just documented, so we're making sure that if there's an overlying issue, we're trying to address it. If you hear about any act of sexual misconduct, you're required to report it. This includes overhearing conversations or direct disclosures. But how do you sort out the rumors? Lucky for you, you don't have to. If you hear about something, just report it, and I'll sort out the rumors. I'll determine what's fake, what's not, what got blown out of proportion, what's real. So you don't have to worry about the rumor mill. Yes?
So does that get reported to you first or to Paul? Paula first.
So best practices is that it should be reported to the Title IX coordinator first, because Paula is in the level of appeal. So if I take a report and I investigate and I say, this is where we had a problem, this is where there's a violation, and this is what I am recommending for disciplinary action, Paula can either accept that or adjust it, or it can be accepted, and then that student could then appeal to Paula, say, hey, Mrs. Schwartz was not fair, this isn't okay, and she can appeal it. So best practices is that it comes to me first, so that Paula remains an unbiased person when it comes to her.
And she's gonna communicate with me saying, hey,
She's-
there was
yeah.
something, you know, I'm gonna investigate it, and I go,
Okay.
you got this,
Mhm.
and then when it's time for me to know, then we.
She'll know the issue, but she won't know the details
Yeah.
until I give her the report.
Got it.
That way she can be an unbiased person when she's evaluating it, because she's in the appeals level. That helps keep her her
perspective.
her spot safe, so that if lawyers were to ever get involved and be like, well, this is what your policy states, but that's not what you did, and then we get into trouble when we don't follow our own policies.
Okay.
Yeah. So what does it look like when you get a disclosure? So midterms and finals are the most common times for disclosures. It's really common for someone who's been a victim of sexual assault to delay in reporting. Most of the time they want to either forget that it even happened and move on, and they're having trouble doing that, or they don't want to draw attention, or they don't know what to do, they don't know what their resources are, and so it's very common for a delay in reporting. However, when it comes to school, midterms and finals are when they start to see that it had a negative impact on them. Their grades are starting to suffer. They don't know how they're going to get out of this hole that they found themselves in, and so that's when they start to say, well, something happened, or I haven't been able to concentrate since this happened, or I cannot work with my lab partner anymore, and you knew that they had a previous romantic relationship. So things like that will give you red flags that something happened, and that trauma that's going on in their mind is affecting their ability to study, their ability to focus on their classes, or they might stop coming to class altogether. If they share a class with that same individual, they don't want to be around them, so they stop coming to that class that they share, something like that. So you'll see red flags in their behavior. You might not always know why, but that's always a good time to start providing inquiry or asking for help. Hey, I noticed this about my student. I'm not sure what's going on. Like getting some feedback, getting some different, what is the word I'm looking for? Ideas on how to address that, because it might not be something like that, but it might be. You just never know. So what you need to do, if the victim is a student and the accused is a student, you need to report it. If the victim is a student but the accused is not a student, you need to report it, because we want to make sure that our students are still getting the support that they need, and they might need a little more academic support at that time, or a little more counseling, or whatever we can offer them. We want to make sure that we are setting them up for success, and that this isn't a determining factor of them being able to graduate or attend class or anything like that. If the victim is not a student but the accused is a student, you need to report it, because if we have an accused student offending, we want to make sure that we're addressing that so that it no longer is able to happen on our campus, on our school. And then possibly if the student witnesses a violent act of sexual misconduct by others who are not affiliated at home. So maybe it's something that happened at home that they weren't involved with, but they witnessed. Again, we want to make sure that they have support, care, and concern, anything we can do to make sure that they remain successful. And then if the victim is not a student, but the accused is affiliated with the school in any way. So that might be contractors, teachers, any employee, any level, someone that's affiliated with our school. So how do you respond if you get a direct disclosure? It can be really uncomfortable. It puts you on the spot and you don't know how to do that. This is some language that I found is really helpful. So I want to support you and help you any way that I can. Before you go any further, just know there are some things I have to report. If you aren't comfortable with that, I can connect you with someone who is confidential. Because if they tell you, you have to report that, even if they expected you to keep that confidential. But if you tell them up front before they dig into the nitty-gritty, and you just say, hey, just so you know, I have to report things that sound like this, that gives them the choice to say, well, I don't want you to report that. I'll just tell someone else. Or they can say, yeah, that's okay. I want someone to do something about it.
So about stuff like that they have said already, are you need to report that anyway, right?
Yeah, it does need to be reported, and sometimes that can just be documented. Like if it's too old that that other person has left, or we can't do anything about it, that's one thing, and we just document it to make sure that we're not seeing a pattern. Sometimes if they have said something, we will need to do a preliminary investigation and just see how it's affecting our school. If they still want to disclose to you, just listen thoughtfully. Don't be judgmental, even if you don't agree with them or their choices leading up to it. Try to explain the process as best you can and give them relevant contact information, which I'll give you here at the end, and then inform them that I'll be contacting them. That just lets them know that someone else is going to be contacting them. When I contact them, they're already ready for it. They've kind of anticipated that, and they don't feel like you have violated their trust. They're expecting that already. So this is the process. So unfortunately, it is fairly formal, but that helps it remain neutral. We want to cover the important topics like our school obligations, the protections that are available to them. Maybe it's a no contact order, maybe it's switching classes, something like that. And we want to make sure that they understand the process and answer any questions before we dive into the nitty-gritty of things. We want to listen to the complainant's desires and try to meet them if possible. Anything that happens that's a felony level, when they're under 18, it has to be reported to law enforcement. If they are 18, even if they're a student, it doesn't have to be reported to law enforcement, but it's the parent's choice when it rises to a level of a felony. For the investigation, I try to tell them that I'm private, but I'm not confidential. We're a public school, and so if we were to be subpoenaed for anything, all of my notes would have to be turned over. I'm not an ombuds person or a lawyer, so unfortunately I can't be confidential, but I am private. So it only is within the circle that needs to know, and like we said, sometimes that's not even Paula, just on what information is there and who has to know about it. Like I said, it tries to be neutral and objective. We're just there to find the facts. We want to make sure that our students are getting the right resources that they need, but I'm just here to find out if the facts support a violation of our policy or not. And then they ask us to do them in 60 days, but we don't really need that much time because we're small and we don't have a lot of cases. So these are some things that we want to avoid if we hear a direct disclosure. This is victim blaming, given in a different context of money. So if you ask me for $5 and I'm too drunk to say yes or no, it's not okay to go take $5 out of my purse just because I didn't say no. If you put a gun to my head and I give you $5, you still stole $5 even if I physically handed it to you. If I let you borrow $5, that doesn't give the right for your friend to take $5 out of my purse. If you steal $5 and I can't prove it in court, that does not mean you didn't steal $5. Just because I gave you $5 in the past doesn't mean I have to give you $5 in the future. And we'll skip those last two. Go ahead to the next one. So going back to proving it in court. Oh, that's the next one. So with the investigations, we are required to conduct our own investigation. These can happen in tandem with law enforcement, or law enforcement can ask us to hold off, but we cannot rely on the law enforcement investigation to dictate our outcome. So just like plagiarism or cheating is a school rule that gets broken, it's not illegal. It's highly frowned upon, but it's not illegal. We have our own actions that we take for discipline if they break a school rule. So this is the same thing. We have our own bylaws, our own contracts that they're expected to uphold, and when they do that, we have the right to enforce disciplinary action. Like I said, it can be done in tandem. If the police request us to hold off, that's fine. We just document that, but we still have to complete our own investigation when we get the okay from law enforcement. Once they say that it's not going to interfere with theirs, we have to continue our own investigation and complete it. Go ahead. And so the reason we do this is because there's such a difference in the burden of proof that is needed. So the school's determination cannot be based on the criminal court determination because we have our own bylaws and contracts. The burden of proof for a criminal investigation is beyond a reasonable doubt. So you're like almost 100% sure, you're 95% sure there's enough evidence to prove that someone did this. That works for the courts, but not for civil cases or for school policies. And best practices, we use preponderance of the evidence, which is more than 50%, which could be 51%, but it's more likely than not something happened. And you can see that there is such a big difference in the outcome. So while it might not be able to be proven in court, we might be able to prove that it happened within our school system enough where we can keep our school safe.
So Lena, I'm gonna interrupt you for just a minute.
Mhm.
What time do you guys need to be picking kids up?
The bell will ring in about 4 minutes.
Okay, I think I just have
Okay.
2 more slides.
Good, thank you.
So remedial actions, we want to make sure that we're addressing safety and security and accessibility issues. If we can prevent this from happening during the process, that's great. If we have to wait till after the process, that's also a possibility. And we want to make sure that our culture and climate are remaining positive and that our students feel safe and comfortable coming to us with issues. Go ahead. So types of those actions could be a change in class schedule, banned access, maybe they can't go to lunch at a certain time now because of that, generalized education, interim suspension, or other disciplinary action. So to keep in mind, FERPA is the Family Education Rights and Privacy Act. Anything that's part of the student records is protected by FERPA. This includes disciplinary records. No one is allowed access unless indicated by the students or their parents, other than their parents, to view those records. So if you are aware of an issue, you don't talk about it because that is protected by FERPA. And then these are our resources. These are national hotlines. All of these hotlines, minus the sheriff's office and my number, are confidential resources. So if they need to talk to someone about it, but they don't want to talk to the school, these are great hotlines. They serve as informal counselors. They can also help navigate the legal process. They can also just be someone to listen. So if they want to talk about it, but they don't want to report it and they don't want to disclose it to you, these are excellent resources that you can send them to. So with that, that is the end of the presentation. I do have a post-training quiz and reflection that I would like you to complete. If you need to take it and bring it back to me later, if you guys have to go, that's fine. And then after you've completed that, you're free to go.
We better take it.
Thanks.
Yeah, we better.